Alright, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Other Dave Ask Me Anything session. For those who might stumble across this on YouTube and need a bit of explanation, the Ask Me Anything part's pretty self-explanatory, but these questions were submitted ahead of time. So this is not a live recording where I've got people throwing questions at me like a lot of AMAs are done. And this is generally going to be based on the Shoot Project efed that I'm a part of, which you can find more information about from their website, shootproject.com. So, can't guarantee it'll be that interesting for people who don't know anything about efeds or know and don't care. I'll be doing these questions in the order they were submitted, and instead of trying to show any sort of preference or organize them into theme. So let's begin. Our first question is, what is the most favorite team in your least favorite sport and why? I'm going to have to go with the Boston Celtics, which, yes, implies that basketball is my least favorite sport. And the reason I say the Boston Celtics are my most favorite team is because at one point in time the Boston Celtics had Larry Bird, and specifically he had his career during the peak of Michael Jordan's excellence, and the two of them just made great friendly rivals for each other. And more importantly, Larry Bird forever gives goofy-looking white people hope that they can be an NBA legend, which is always important for us goofy white people to recognize. And that's the awkward joke of the AMA out of the way. Alright, we have a set of questions from one person now. This would be Shoot Project admin Josh, or Supreme Commander as his profile gives it. Why do you think you're so hard to get along with? Mainly I would say that it comes down to the fact that I tend to be both self-defensive and paranoid, and as such, when either mood strikes me, I freely admit that I tend to become a total asshole to people, and as such, I'm sure that it makes it hard for people to put up with me even in my best moods, because I can slip into either one of those at the drop of a hat. It's something I've tried to work on over the years. But, some stuff's harder to change about yourself than others. Why does it seem like you get so mad about stuff sometimes? Well, a lot of that was answered in question one. Because when you do get self-defensive about a opinion you give, or a particular stance you have on a moral, philosophical issue, it's kind of hard to be self-defensive and not be angry. I think the other part of it, though, is that I tend to be really passionate about certain things, and so again, it's kind of hard to be passionate about, say, a particular character you write, or a particular thing that you enjoy doing, and not get angry when somebody says, oh, well, it's not interesting, or oh, you don't, your character's lame. And again, I freely admit sometimes I do get angrier than I should, even though I am not trying to. And that's why I've tried to, when I can stop and walk away and catch my breath, go, you know what? I let myself get too passionate, too emotional, and I didn't handle that well, and I tend to apologize to people. Sometimes I don't, because I can't convince myself I was in the wrong. But, that's neither here nor there. I try not to hold grudges. Why are you really taking time off? Generally, it's the answer I gave when I announced my sabbatical, as I like to call it, which is that I'm at a point in work that happens every year where it gets really busy, and so work becomes more stressful and frustrating. And so having less things going on in my personal life tends to make it easier for me to do things like go to sleep at night without laying in bed for a while. In the case of shoot, it's thinking about angles, thinking about role plays, thinking about segments, because I do find a lot of that early planning or unplanned inspiration comes when I'm doing things like trying to relax and not think about stuff in particular. And part of it is, as I said, that I need to take some of my personal time and focus it more on things that I'm not doing that I should be doing. And some of it is I'm doing stuff that I really, could probably spend less time doing. It sounds funny given I rarely write matches, but there are certain days where, like on my day off, I will basically do nothing but piss around the shoot project boards, NRP, and write. So I'll very quickly lose an entire afternoon to shoot project, even though I don't have much to show for it as far as number of RPs or segments written, just because shoot is the kind of thing that when you're in it, you're really in it, and you want to read results and reread results and think about what everybody's doing. And it's not just shoot, there's some other stuff that I've already kind of trimmed down on. All my hobbies tend to be very time consuming, as everybody's hobbies tend to be, but it's just I need to pull back and rebalance my time with things. To a lesser extent, and I've admitted this to other people, is part of the taking time off is I feel like I've got burned out on Tanya a bit. I had been since I got to shoot, I'd kind of been running this storyline where she was very emotionally damaged and unbalanced after, going through the neck injuries and rehabbing and her long-term relationship ending and, coming to a new company and things not working out the way she wanted to. It was one of those storylines where I started doing it because it gave me a lot of good material and it gave me a way to focus on Tanya's life story for the RPs and the people that didn't know the character, that felt organic. And I just kind of never ended it. I kind of kept her in that emotionally raw and beaten up state, which got to a point where, something had to give, and at the same time, when I realized it was about time to wrap it up, I kind of looked at what else was going on in Shoot, what I had been contributing to Shoot on a storyline in character level, and realized it was all culminating. I didn't have a direction to take Tanya after this. I didn't really have any major angles that I wanted to run, that were sitting on the back burner there ready to be started up, and so it just felt like the time for me to take a step back from Shoot on that level as well, because unlike a lot of people here, I don't have multiple characters, so when I hit a wall with Tanya, I can't just say, okay, well, I just won't ask for her to be booked for a while and I'll go write my resident tag team that I haven't done much with right now. Which, I probably could start a new character in the interim, but with all the other stuff I just said, it would just cause problems. I wouldn't be able to mentally focus on creating that new character and launching it properly. Alright, what goes into creating a Tanya Black RP and your general process for writing the character? Well, like people who read my RPs, in most efed RPs, Tanya's tend to have two sections, a match promo part and a ongoing character development story part, which is what I had touched on earlier. And the promo part tends to come easier because I've created the Tanya Black character years ago by now. I've run her regularly for a long time, spent a long time crafting and developing her character, and kind of gone up against most personality archetypes. Oh, I had a little kitty run in. My cat apparently wants to check out the anime. Hold on. Kitty did not like the camera, apparently. Readjustment here. We are doing this all in one take, folks. So yeah, the promos tend to, because I know Tanya so well, she is so well developed as a wrestler, and I've got the experience with her, going up against monster heels, going up against, shining knight faces, that writing the promos tends to come very easy. I just kind of let it simmer in the back of my mind until I get one really good chunk of the promo, and then I start consciously focusing on it, and that tends to make everything flow from there. And a lot of that automatic part too comes from reading the results regularly and reading people's RPs when I can, and when I see something particularly interesting, I'll go back and read the RPs, or if somebody asks. But so since I tend to know the shoot characters, I tend to, in the back of my mind, have a base outline of what Tanya thinks of them and what she would say when she goes to match up against them, which, as I said, pretty much makes it a easy to do part, at least compared to the character development. That's the part where I really sit down and put my writer's thinking cap on. I will go around and sit there and say, okay, what did I do in the last few RPs? Where am I at in the story? What am I in the mood to write? Do I want to drag her through the ringer? Do I want to, give her a lighthearted moment? Do I want to focus on our history? What would be a good style scene to do right now? And from there, I pretty much just, like most of us do when we write, start plugging in the details, just go through, construct the outline in my mind, and then from there I start writing. Because again, a lot of the dialogue, and maybe this is why some people don't like my RPs as much as others, I don't know, but a lot of the dialogue tends to come naturally once I set the scene up and sit down to write. Again, like with the promos, I by and large let Tanya write herself and just focus on creating a scene where I know the basic attitude she's going to have and the mood she's going to be in such a situation, and let the rest of it flow from there. And then I, do the boring part of, once it's all done, formatting and tossing it up on the board. What goes through your mind every time you think you need to make an alignment change? Mostly what goes through my mind is, what advantages does it give the Fed and its ongoing stories and continuity? Mostly because I do not have a really ironclad, faces can only fight heels mindset when it comes to long-term angles. I don't have that worry in the back of my mind of, well, if I want to, spend a pay-per-view cycle or maybe two feuding with Liz Gaunt, I have to turn Tanya face because Liz is a heel, and Tanya and Liz can't feud if they're both heels. No, I don't have that mindset, because that doesn't work for me. It doesn't make sense in my mind that two people who are villainous wouldn't want to go at each other. Especially, again, picking on Liz, where she's part of a group that has a very definitive goal that, like pretty much any heel stable, is if you're not with us, you're against us. why should it matter what Tanya's alignment is? But at that same point, if I were approached with the idea of feuding with Liz for a cycle or two, or however long things want to be, but as part of a greater story, where Tanya is even potentially part of a loose-knit group of allies, going against Scar, so there would be different tag matches, and she would have to work with other people, and everybody else on that side were faces, so it would be a distinct face army versus heel army situation. Then yeah, I would look at saying, okay, well, Tanya needs to turn face, because that's the point of this greater feud, is face army versus heel army. And I want her role to not hurt that storyline and hamper it by her being a heel amongst a lot of faces. But yeah, generally I don't feel that your alignment should distinctly limit your character's personality. You can have faces who are mean, and if people want to argue with you, I'm sorry, look at Samoa Joe in TNA or Stone Cold in WWE. These are guys that no matter what their alignment, they will look at you and say, well, Samoa Joe's going to kill you, or, well, old Stone Cold's going to stomp a mud hole in your ass. So, there's just certain points where the face-heel distinction, I think, has more to do with your motivating factors than your distinct personality. And that's where generally I leave it up to the audience to decide. I ran Tanya for a while here and shoot as a heel. But a lot of that was because I had gotten feedback when she was still face that she was coming off more as a heel, and people felt like it was hurting the feuds and the individual RPs when they're reading it, knowing she's a face and she's supposed to, have a certain mindset, and that mindset is not what they were encountering. But again, that's part of the general Fed atmosphere. Because that's kind of what I wanted to do with Tanya at the time, and what felt natural and good for me as a writer to do. I said, okay, well, if the general feeling from the Fed is she's acting like a heel, we'll go ahead and label her a heel. So yeah, that's what goes through my mind, is it good for the greater group? Because at the end of the day, I generally don't care what my label is. Tanya is a person with her own personality and her own philosophies, and a lot of that, which is a reflection of my own OC viewpoints, is that she just wants to compete and wrestle with everybody. So she's not going to sit there and say, well, I'm a face, I can't, be envious of your position in the company, or I can't want to beat you to prove to myself that I am your equal as a wrestler, because you're also a face, and that's just not how faces act. Because I don't believe that, I don't incorporate that into my mindset of should somebody be a heel or a face. There has to be a grander plan and scheme behind it. Yes, G, Money does get credit for asking if the most favorite team in your least favorite sport does count. Although I did answer that in the thread, I'm just being thorough here. What do you enjoy about efedding? I enjoy the fact that because it's an ongoing shared continuity, that there is a certain level of, hopefully, maturity and personal responsibility with what you're doing, because, you know, especially if you're currently a champion of any level, your storylines do affect the rest of the company. Because every title feud should be priority and spotlight angles for the promotion, and should be what you point out to people when you're trying to recruit them as well. Look how great our world title angles are. You know, if you get involved in the company, you know, that's the kind of quality angles that you can expect to, you know, raise your game up to, or if you're, you know, that's how we roll, basically. But even if it's not a title feud, anything that shows up in the results in that shared continuity can make or break both people joining the Fed, which is always essential, because when people join, they bring in fresh perspectives, they bring in fresh characters, they bring in fresh opportunities to work with new people. And all of that shared continuity can also impact whether people stay or leave. Or, excuse me, stay and leave's redundant. Stay and leave's right, damn it. Yeah, whether they stay or leave. I freely admit, you know, I've been through several efeds, some for a cup of tea, you know, or a cup of coffee, whichever your liquid preferably is. But that's because on the surface the Fed looked good, or because I had a buddy who begged me, you know, we just need a few more people on the roster. So I was like, okay, I can give you one of my side characters, because this was at a point where I had the time and energy to run multiple characters. And ended up leaving because even as a side project, it wasn't worth my time, and it annoyed the piss out of me. Because there were storylines I just did not agree with. I have in the past actually gotten into arguments with admins because they allowed certain angles to play out the way they did, and in fact approved of and rewarded those angles and RPs when I felt it was something that was in really poor taste, and just made me not want to be associated with that particular efed. You know, if it's something one guy does, and, you know, in an RP, or it's a segment, you know, I understand, especially RPs, you don't have to get them read and approved to make it on the boards. And even segments, no. You know, a lot of times admins just don't have the time to read and review everything, or, you know, they don't want to feel like they're being too controlling, so they just put up what people send in. But if something goes up, everybody's a chance to read it. and somebody comes to you and says, that's not really something I'm comfortable with, or if you get if you get like half the roster look at you and go, that's really not right. That's not something people should do, whether it doesn't fit the theme of the Fed, or it's just plain offensive. And I try not to be offended easily, but some stuff is just plain offensive, and it's obviously done for shock value. And your attitude is, well, piss off, I don't care what people put in my results. I'm not going to want to be in your efed. Because A, that's not a good way to talk to your talent. People will go and find other efeds if you show absolutely zero care for a well-spoken, constructive criticism. But I enjoy the fact that, trying to go back to the original point here, because you're writing with multiple people and all contributing to a greater whole, that good and great efeders understand the responsibility that comes with that and strive to, not going to say they have to always accomplish it, but at least strive to think about the way it looks for the group and work with each other when something may or may not be for the best interest of, in this example, Shoot Project, to have as an example of what people will be getting into. Even if they don't join, but just as an outsider who wants to regularly read this stuff. Because if people don't think about what's good for the group doesn't last. As opposed to, say, if you're just writing for yourself and tossing it up on your, blog or whatever, you can write whatever you want. Worst comes to worst, you go really off the rails and you get your account banned. It's easy enough to sneak back in. What stories that you were not involved in do you wish you were? Honestly, I can't really say any, because that question implies that I believe my involvement, specifically since I only have the one character here, Tanya's involvement, would have made the story better. And that is something that I have yet to encounter here in Shoot, that where I read something and thought, this would be so much better if I was in on this. I could do so much to improve and enhance the story. Because honestly, I just don't have that much confidence in myself and my character to just brighten any room she walks into, so to speak. A lot of angles or stories, as the question said, here in Shoot, either did not click with me on such a level that I don't feel me being involved would have saved it, because it was so far from what I would have gotten involved in, or it works so well that I really don't think it could be improved in any way by me being involved in it, and then me being involved with it probably would have taken away from the story. I do think that the aborted Hope story, the Hope Army, whatever the official group was going to be called, I was intrigued by the early points of it. I was not involved in any of it. I'm going to go ahead and say that now, but I would have liked to have been, because the base idea that started up, that we started seeing in the show results and the segments, seemed like it could have been a very well thought out story that would have done a lot for a lot of people. And as with most of my shoot run, at the time I was not thoroughly entrenched in something that would have been so much better than me getting involved with what I thought that angle could have been, which potentially, like a lot of great group versus group grand feuds, would have led to a variety of matches against a variety of people with a larger connecting theme that would have inspired my writing more and moved me along a definitive path, win or lose, no matter who I was going up against, because it all fed back into that greater angle. And if that's not what the angle was going to be, then oh well, but that was my interpretation of it. And that's really the only story that I would have wished I had been involved in. But again, that wasn't even that story barely got launched. We only saw the early chapter of it when the plug was pulled, so I'm not sure if that counts as far as what you were thinking. Will you read shoot stuff while on break? Yes. The main thing I'm taking a break from is the... One sec. Alright, let me check my view here again. Alright, that looks... that's sufficient. Not sure much people like staring at my face anyway, but... yeah, the main thing I'm going to be taking a break from is the writing. It is the thinking about, my next angle, my current angle, and the next step of it. The role-playing, because that is what consumes the most of my time, and I will be spending less time on the boards. I'll probably dip into the shoot chat room a bit. Probably, post OC when I have something I really want to say, keeping people up to date on my status. As far as if I've had a complete mental breakdown or I'm just accomplished something awesome. But I will read the results. And if somebody wants to hit me up on AIM and request I read a particular RP to get my opinion of it, I will be glad to do that because, as I said, I keep referring to it as a sabbatical. I do intend to still be a part of Shoot Project, just not a constantly active part. So, people feel free to talk to me on AIM. Feel free to ask my opinion on what you're doing and the results, or what your RP's doing, because I will be reading the results and I will read anything on request. But yeah, primarily it's a break from the, as I said before, spending all afternoon doing nothing but thinking about shoot and not getting other stuff accomplished. Let's see. What non-efed questions would we efeders ask? Well, of course, as I said, I've got multiple hobbies, and some of those I've discussed with people over the, course of the chats and my, personal post-whoring thread. So you could ask about those. What are your top 3 non-efed questions? I don't know, because I'm not thinking about questions to ask myself. I already know the answers. And that's why, no, I will not be answering them for you. If you cannot really think of a way to ask me about something that isn't shoot related, then you don't get to know about things that aren't shoot related unless I go off on a tangent on somebody else's question. Alright, we got a multi-set from Drezzy. Vikings versus Nazis. Who wins and why is it the Vikings? Well, I'm assuming you're not referring to the Minnesota Vikings, because fuck them, I'm not a fan of that particular football team. I'm also going to assume that everybody is at a weapons technology equivalency. Because as great as the Vikings are, if all they have is their hand-to-hand weapons and their shields, they are not going to beat people armed with, airstrike options and tanks and landmines. But yeah, assuming a technology balance, the Vikings would win because they're motivated strictly by, let's go find an awesome fight. These guys think that the eternal heavenly reward for being a great fighter is going to Valhalla and continuing to fight for eternity. That's just not something I would want to go up against. How do you mentally defeat somebody whose mindset is, fighting is so awesome, I want to do it even after I die? You don't want to get in a fight with somebody like that. Not unless you have a clear multi-century weapons advantage. Ghost Rider versus Alex Mack. What is your preferred forgotten 90s kids show? Alex Mack all the way. Ghost Rider was a fine attempt by PBS to do something a little different with something resembling a budget, but the idea of a bunch of little kids being guided by a always invisible ghost that could, just write out its messages on anything did not work for me as a kid. It doesn't work for me now. You always want a visible protagonist with a distinct personality and motivation, because that's how you relate to a character. That is how you get emotionally invested in a character's journey. The Ghost was a storyline prop and a weak one. And from what I remember of the show, the kids themselves, none of them even made good protagonists. Even as a group, they were so generic, nosy kid. And that is why I cannot stand live-action family movies now, because all the characters are these prepubescent children that have no personality or motivating factor beyond this two-dimensional, I'm smarter than all the adults, I'm more moral than any adult I'm ever going to see, I'm going to save the day and be the great hero because I can't rely on anybody over the age of 13 to do it. That's insulting on multiple levels to anybody over the age of 13. It's the most blatant kind of childish fantasy that does not encourage children to even think of themselves as an adult hero. Not, I want to grow up to become a badass FBI agent. Not, I want to grow up to be a brave firefighter. But I can go out and do these things now. I just have to find a cause to fight, and I'll, save the day without having to learn any major skills because, what's the big throwback they do? Well, not throwback, but throwaway line. Well, he's a prodigy. So he's automatically better than an adult that's had 25 years experience and professional training at computer hacking. But yeah, he's better than a whole group of adults that have this kind of experience and training because he's a prodigy. No, that doesn't work. And Ghost Rider was a great example of this. Alex Mack had allies of, various ages that helped her, and most of her bad guys were specifically stated to be complete idiots and incompetent. So there was and she had superpowers. There was a very distinct, she can do this because she is unique in a distinguishable way. She had abilities. She was cheating because most people didn't know about the abilities, and they did evolve as the show went on. It was still cheesy, but it was a fun cheesy. It was camp. Could Tanya Black beat Alan Moore's Swamp Thing? Well, Drizzy, that's a trick question because Alan Moore does not have a Swamp Thing. DC has a Swamp Thing that after it was created by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson, I believe I got that last name pronounced properly, Alan Moore was allowed to write for a short period of time. Well, I mean, not short. It was a pretty respectable run, but there's been a lot of Swamp Thing done since for many years. But if you're referring to the Alan Moore era DC Swamp Thing, no, because in any era, physical attacks pretty much just piss Swamp Thing off. I don't think Tanya Black has the superheroic ability to overcome that disadvantage, and she does not possess the intelligence to create a situation where Swamp Thing's regenerative abilities are both completely neutralized, and she can do enough damage to Swamp Thing where he would desperately need that regenerative ability to, win the fight. What is your favorite movie soundtrack? Top Gun's always a good standby. There's a Rocky soundtrack that's actually the best music from all the different Rocky soundtrack movies. It's a best of the franchise, basically, and that is on that list. The Little Shop of Horror movie, the one from the 80s with Rick Moranis, not the much older Jack Nicholson one. It is a good soundtrack, too. It kind of cheats because it's a musical, but it was a musical movie, so I'm calling it. Let's see. Favorite question and answer combination in Cards Against Humanity? I would have to go with my one Hall of Fame worthy answer of I did not understand teaching a robot to love until I encountered Mecha Hitler. Because that in itself sounds like a pitch for an awesomely camp, dark humor, tongue-in-cheek type, movie or miniseries, comic book, whatever your preferred media format is. Oh, you've got a robotic Hitler. You're teaching it to love instead of be Hitler. How does that not sound like something you want to sit there and at least give a chance to? Read the first couple chapters there. So there's that. Let's see. Some questions from Tim. Timmy, Big T. Favorite anime of all time? I would have to go with a toss-up. The Dragon Ball Meta series is going to be on that list because it was the first anime that I really sat down and watched, in order. Ignore that. That was my phone. But watched in order, long stretches of episodes. It was what really started making me look at this anime thing and get more into it and look more at what could potentially be out there for it, which, again, as people have taught me know, I'm a big anime fan, so it was a opening the floodgates type situation. Plus, it still stands on a creative writing level as the prototype show for the, shonen genre. You look at modern shows and almost every single major shonen series that has come after, you can see influences from Dragon Ball. If you go and find translated interviews with the creators, they will admit to this. We're big fans of Dragon Ball. It was a great influence on, us deciding what we wanted to write. So that's always going to get a high rank. Cowboy Bebop's another great one because it ran the exact length of time it needed to run. It told its story and called it instead of saying, okay, well, I'm popular, so we're just going to keep going until the popularity craps out and people hate it, and it tarnishes the legacy. Like so many American shows do. Oh, it was great, oh, this is great, oh, this is great. By the time you get the series finale, man, they should have ended that show about 2 seasons ago when it was still awesome. No. Bebop avoided that. It had great characters. You meet a given protagonist because some of them were introduced after the first episode, and you very quickly learn enough about them that you can decide whether you like them or hate them, and there's still enough questions left that it hooks you for later. Especially when, you see the little sneak previews of the next episode, you're like, oh, they're going to address this question I've been having for 4 or 5 episodes. Yes! And the music's awesome. The music is a major factoring point in the series. The episodes all have musical connotations, references, and it's just extremely well composed. I've actually got a couple different CDs worth of Cowboy Bebop soundtracks because you can just listen to the music and appreciate the music as standalone music. What's in your wallet? Nothing really interesting. My debit, credit cards, my IDs, my social security card. I always keep some cash on hand because sometimes paying with cash is the easiest way to go. That's really it. I don't really keep personal pictures or anything in it. My wallet is a utility accessory. We spoke about you feeling like you may have hit a wall with Tanya. Why do you feel this way? I basically addressed this earlier, but to reiterate, I had a subtle, ongoing psychological mindset with Tanya from pretty much the time I came into shoot a few years ago that I recently concluded, partly because I realized all the other factors were building up and that I had kind of stretched this out far past what I had originally intended, and that it was time. But I didn't have a next step to take with Tanya yet. I had not thought about that. I was focusing on, because I was struggling creatively, because I had those other factors we had discussed in my brain as well. I was just focusing on reaching a good conclusion to the story, which I felt I did. If you read my last couple RPs that I did for the Elite pay-per-view, but a lot of it, that's just it, is I was not doing what a good writer should do and looking 2 steps ahead. What are you going to do next? What's the next chapter? So I hit that wall. I don't know where I want to take Tanya, and so until I've got a direction, why drag her through stuff? And I think it happens to everybody after a point. You just kind of have to let a character sit, whether it's for a show RPing cycle, for a pay-per-view cycle, which depending on efed can take a month to 3 months. It's a personal thing. It varies. I'm sure eventually I'll come up with a really good RP for Tanya. But until then, I would just be forcing myself to write her, and I would just be writing fluff just at post something, and I don't want to do that. Some of my RPs, usually the second RP in a given set, that's what it was. I was just posting fluff up there just to put something up. And that was one of my first warning signs that not just I had hit a wall with Tanya, but why I had hit the wall, and that's what led to the sabbatical. That was the last real question for the AMA. So we're going to go ahead and conclude this in a minute. I do want to say, because I know people may have been a little confused about things, because I have been angry at times with people here, because I have gone on record when prompted as not liking certain angles done in shoot, not really liking certain characters done in shoot. And again, that's not a criticism of the person's writing ability. It's not a criticism of the person behind the character. It's about personal tastes. I know not everybody enjoys Tanya. Not everybody, enjoys all the angles I've done. I haven't enjoyed some of the angles I've done because they've gotten away from me and they didn't end the way I wanted them to. But what I'm getting at is I'm not quitting. I'm not ongoing angry at anybody here in shoot. I don't want people to think that I have a problem with shoot project as a whole or with anybody here, whether they be on staff or role playing. Everybody here is awesome. Some a lot less so than others. Because let's face it, especially as role players, we've got a couple guys here, B and Jer, as examples I don't think anybody can argue with, that set a very high standard for efed style role playing. that it's hard to be their equal. It's hard to hang with them, especially for the length of an entire feud. And again, this comes from somebody that doesn't necessarily like all of their characters, that doesn't necessarily enjoy everything they write on a, I find this personally entertaining, 4 stars, 2 thumbs up level. But I respect the talent behind it and the work they put into it. Which is one of the things that, leads my perspective in efedding. I can hate your character, but I can respect you as an RPer. I can hate an angle, but I can like all the characters involved. I just don't agree with why they're feuding or agree that they should be feuding. Because some characters, just like people in real life, don't mesh well. They don't click. They don't have chemistry. There's people, I've loved their characters. I thought the person was a total douchebag. And vice versa. There's people, I thought they're the greatest people in the world as a person to talk to chat with and hang out with online. But they suck at this game. And they keep trying regardless. And there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make you a bad person. Hell, I'll be honest, a lot of times I feel like I suck at this. Because, I do have to stop and look at something and go, okay, nobody liked what I did. Maybe I need to put my ego aside and say I just wrote something shitty. But in summary, the point I'm trying to get to is I still believe that Shoot Project is a great efed. I think everybody who cares about the efed game, role-playing professional wrestlers with other people and doing it competitively, but, maturely competitively, be an adult about it. Don't troll and throw a hissy fit every time you lose, because I've been in efeds with these people. They ruin the game for everything. And that goes back to what I was saying earlier. But I think anybody who cares about efedding should give Shoot Project a look. Talk to the staff. Whether it's the admins or, the lieutenants that are there to help them, they're all cool people. Some of them, you go peek into the chat room without bracing yourself. We all get a little crazy in chat. But it's generally a private chat. It happens with everybody. But everybody should give Shoot Project a look, should consider, if not actively joining, reading the results, because I have yet to encounter an efed that across the board is a better efed than Shoot Project. Obviously, if you see this and you're into efeds and you've got a different efed and you disagree with that opinion, hey, maturely, hit me up, give me, a link to your site and just say, well, check my fed out. What do you think about it? I'll be glad to give constructive criticism on a general fed group's feel. Why, for instance, I wouldn't join it if I was looking for an efed to join. Because I've been doing this since 2001, off and on. This isn't the first time I've taken a sabbatical. Everybody needs to recharge their batteries. I've been a part of various efeds. A lot of them just eventually wore out and shut down. That happens. There's no shame attached to that. Some, as I said before, just didn't click for me personally. But, you know, I have seen a lot of stuff. But if you ask me for criticism, yes, it will be constructive, but you need to be prepared for criticism. You need to be capable of saying, okay, I did not think of it from that perspective before. I'll, certainly meditate on this. Or, well, I disagree with you, but I appreciate you offering that differing opinion. And it's not just, as I said, about the efeds. As I said earlier, I'll discuss individual role plays and angles with you if you want. With, as far as my shoot brethren go. But please, people, please. And I don't assume anybody in shoots has a problem with this. But it can happen. As I said, I get self-defensive sometimes. Please, if you come to me and request for me to give you my honest opinion, I'm going to try to be as constructive as possible with any criticism I have, but you've got to be ready to hear it. Don't get butthurt, because that is what's going to make me want to not come back to actively role-playing, honestly, because that kills my desire to want to be creative. When part of the community, especially a larger, more influential part of the community, just requests your honest opinion and then freaks out when you give it to them. That's the only advice I'm going to give to those people in Shoot Project right now. When it comes to interacting with each other or recruiting new people or how you treat new people. And again, I'm not picking on anybody. I'm not accusing anybody of anything. It happens in all efeds from time to time. You've got to be ready to hear something you don't want to hear. Even if you have to stop, walk away from the computer because your instinct is to give an emotional, spur-of-the-moment, snappy, nasty response. Even if you have to come back 3 days later and respond to that constructive criticism, if it is constructive, especially if you have requested it, respond maturely, no matter how long it takes for you to get into that mindset. That keeps people wanting to feedback each other. When they know their feedback, whether good or bad, because it was well thought out, is appreciated. That's what keeps people giving feedback. That's what makes people want to join feds, when they know there's a positive atmosphere where we're all trying to help each other have fun. That is what gets new recruits. That is what keeps an efed strong. And eventually, when I get my own stuff handled, that is what's going to make me want to focus on bringing Tanya back or bringing another character in and actively rejoining Shoot. Because I'm wanting to be here, wanting to feel like other people want me here, not just for my character, but as a person. Because any kind of role-playing, there are people behind the characters. Everybody's got an opinion. Everybody is going to have a slightly different opinion. Except Josh and Brandon, who have a hive mind. But that's okay. We love them for it. And that's why they make a great team. That's all I've got to say, folks. I hope you enjoyed.